My name is Caroline Whitaker, and I was 39 years old, the night I came home and found my daughter's bedroom being erased. It was a Thursday, a little after 8, and I still had my school badge clipped to my cardigan. I had spent the last 2 hours in an IEP meeting, explaining to two exhausted parents why their son needed more time, more patience, more room to become himself. I remember thinking, as I pulled into my driveway, that all I wanted was to kiss Maisie's forehead, take off my shoes, and stand in a silent kitchen for 5 minutes. But the house was not silent. There were footsteps upstairs, a drawer scraping wood. My sister Tessa's voice saying, "Put that box by the closet." Then I saw the hallway light spilling across the landing, and Maisie's door wide open. Her bed was gone. The little white frame shaped like a cottage, the one I had assembled by myself with a blistered thumb and a YouTube tutorial, was leaning in pieces against the wall. Her moon lamp sat in a cardboard box beside her stuffed animals. Half the planets we had stuck above her dresser had been peeled away, leaving pale circles on the blue wall like bruises. In the middle of the room, Tessa was smoothing a baseball comforter over a new mattress. Beverly, my mother, stood in the doorway with her arms folded. "We talked as a family," she said. "Nolan needs this room more than Maisie does." I looked at the wall, where Saturn used to be. I looked at the box with my daughter's moon inside it. Then I saw Maisie at the end of the hall, barefoot, holding her sleeves in both fists. "Mommy," she whispered, "did I do something wrong? Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. That question did something to me that shouting never could. I wanted to drop to my knees in that hallway and promise Maisie that nothing about this was her fault, that no grown woman with folded arms and a family speech had the right to make an 8-year-old feel removable. But she was watching my face, the way children do when they are trying to decide whether the world is still safe. So I held out my hand and kept my voice steady. "Come here, baby." She came to me, baby, barefoot on the hardwood, her shoulders tucked inward like she was already trying to make herself smaller. I felt that tiny movement against my side, and it brought me back to the first day we walked into this house, when she had taken up space without apology. 2 years earlier, Willowbend Drive looked like a bad investment to almost everyone but me. It was a tired Cape Cod outside Harrisburg with peeling shutters, a porch that leaned a little to the left, and a kitchen full of yellow laminate counters that had survived at least 3 presidents. The real estate agent kept pointing out flaws, like she was warning me away. The roof would need work. The upstairs windows stuck in humid weather. The basement smelled faintly of rain. I remember nodding politely, because she did not understand what I was seeing. I was not looking for perfect. I was looking for ours. I had spent 11 years getting there. As a speech-language pathologist in the public school system, my days were measured in small, private victories: a child asking for help instead of shutting down, a nervous kindergartner finally naming what hurt, a 5th grader reading one paragraph out loud without hiding behind his sleeve. I loved that work, but love did not build a down payment. So I took summer evaluations, late reports, weekend screenings, every extra assignment that could turn one more hour into one more dollar. After my divorce from Clay, that savings account became a promise I never said out loud. Maisie and I were not going to spend the rest of our lives fitting ourselves into places someone else could take back. The house cost $286,000. My down payment was $41,500, saved in pieces so small they almost felt imaginary. The mortgage was $1,940 a month. The deed had one name on it: Caroline Whitaker. For once, my name was enough. On closing day, Maisie ran through the empty rooms with a paper crown from a drive-through kids' meal still crooked on her head. She stopped in the upstairs bedroom with the maple tree outside the window and whispered, "Can this one be mine?" I said yes. And I meant it in a way no one else in that house had understood yet. For the first 2 months, it really was just ours. Maisie learned which step on the staircase made the softest creak, and I learned that the maple tree brushed the upstairs window whenever the wind came from the west. We bought second-hand bookshelves, fixed the porch rail with a borrowed drill, and ate most of our dinners at the little breakfast counter because the dining room still had boxes stacked against the wall. It was not a polished life, but every key on my ring opened something I had paid for, and every room waited for us instead of someone else's permission. Then Tessa's marriage collapsed. My sister had always treated disaster like weather, something that happened to her and required everyone else to bring umbrellas. She called me on a Sunday afternoon crying so hard I could barely make out the words. Beverly took the phone from her after a minute and explained that Tessa and Nolan needed somewhere peaceful for a few weeks, just until the court schedule settled and Tessa found her footing. "A few weeks," my mother said. "Not forever, Caroline. Just family helping family." Beverly arrived with them that evening and never really left. She came in carrying a casserole dish, 2 garment bags, and the kind of confidence people have when they have already decided your answer for you. Calvin followed the next weekend with 3 plastic bins, 2 fishing rods, and the recliner he said helped his back. By Monday, the den had become Tessa's room, the corner of the garage had become my father's storage, and my mother had moved my coffee mugs to a lower cabinet because, in her words, "This works better for everyone." Nobody asked. They just adjusted the house around themselves. At first, the changes were too small to fight without sounding petty. Beverly replaced my dish rack and threw the old one away. Calvin left his mail on the entry table until my bills disappeared under pharmacy receipts. Tessa used my laundry basket because hers was probably still in the car. Nolan scattered sneakers and action figures through the hallway, and I reminded myself, he was a child whose life had been cracked open too. So I swallowed it. Then the language changed. My mother stopped saying "your house" and started saying "the house." A few weeks later, it became our place. By Christmas, when Aunt Marjorie came over with cookies, Beverly stood in my kitchen and said, "We're finally making this feel like a real family home." I was rinsing plates when she said it. My hands were in warm water. Maisie was upstairs in her moonroom, humming to herself. That was the first time I looked around my own kitchen and felt like a guest who had been too polite to ask for her chair back. The moonroom did not become special because it was pretty. It became special because Maisie and I made it slowly, with tired hands and cheap supplies, during a season when everything else in our lives still felt temporary. The first weekend after we moved in, I took her to Target with a coupon folded in my purse. We did not have money for matching furniture or custom curtains, so we stood in the children's aisle comparing peel and stick stars like they were diamonds. Maisie picked the planets because Jupiter had a storm on it, and she said storms were less scary when they stayed in space. I bought the moon lamp because it was on clearance, and because she held the box against her chest with both arms like she was afraid someone else might claim it first. That night, we spread newspaper across the floor and painted one wall, a deep blue that looked almost black before it dried. Maisie wore one of my old t-shirts over her pajamas, and every time she dipped the roller into the tray, she stuck out the tip of her tongue in concentration. I remember standing in the doorway, watching her make careful little strokes near the baseboard, and thinking that this was what healing looked like. Not a big announcement, not a new life arriving all at once. Just a child believing a wall could become the sky. We named the places that mattered. The window corner became Saturn Station. The shelf beside her bed became Rocket Library. The narrow wall by the closet became Quiet Moon, because that was where she went when the world felt too loud. She kept a pillow there, 3 picture books, and a notebook where she drew animals wearing space helmets. After Clay and I divorced, Maisie had asked more than once if we would have to move again, whether her toys would fit in the next place, whether Daddy's apartment counted as home too, even if her toothbrush there stayed in a plastic cup. She was too young to explain the fear clearly, but I understood it. She wanted to know which parts of her life could disappear without warning. So when she finally had that room, I treated it like a promise. I knocked before entering. I asked before moving her drawings. I let her decide where the glow stars went, even when the constellations made no sense to anyone but her. because they made sense to her. And that was enough. By the time my family started calling my house our place, Maisie's room had already become the one corner nobody was supposed to rewrite. It was not the largest room because she was spoiled. It was not hers, because I loved her more than Nolan. It was hers because a child who has already watched one home split in two deserves one door that stays closed until she opens it. That was why, when they later tried to call it just a bedroom, I knew they had never understood what they were taking. They called it a birthday conversation, which should have warned me. It was the Tuesday before Nolan turned 9. Beverly had made pot roast, the kind of meal she cooked when she wanted the house to smell like agreement before anyone had actually agreed to anything. Tessa set the table with paper napkins printed with baseballs, even though the party was still 4 days away. Calvin sat at the end with the evening news low behind him, pretending not to notice the way my mother kept glancing down the hall. Maisie was at the coffee table, coloring a rocket ship. Nolan was on the floor beside her, building something with plastic bricks. They were close enough to hear everything, and young enough that the adults still acted like they were furniture. Halfway through dinner, Tessa put down her fork and said, "I've been thinking about Nolan's birthday." Beverly nodded before my sister finished the sentence. "He doesn't need more toys," Tessa said. Her voice trembled in that careful way that made people lean toward her. "He needs stability, a real space, something that feels like his." Nolan stopped pressing 2 bricks together. His eyes flicked toward his mother, then down to his hands. He knew when adults were about to use his sadness as a microphone. I kept my fingers around my water glass. "He has space in the den. That isn't a bedroom, Caroline." Tessa looked at me as if I had personally invented her divorce. "It's a pull-out couch and a dresser by the printer. You told me it was temporary." Beverly folded her napkin into a square. She always did that when she was about to say something cruel in a reasonable voice. Temporary has to become practical at some point. The room went quiet except for the television and the small plastic click of Nolan pretending to keep building. I knew where this was going before anyone said it. My body knew first. My shoulders tightened. My jaw locked. "No," I said. Tessa blinked. "You don't even know what I'm asking." "Yes, I do." Beverly sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. "Maisie has you. She has consistency. Nolan's whole life has been turned upside down. Would it really hurt her to sleep with you for a few months?" Maisie's crayon stopped moving. That was the moment I stopped looking at my mother and looked at my daughter instead. Her head was down, but her ears had gone red. She was listening. Of course she was listening. "My daughter's room is not a recovery gift for someone else's child," I said. Tessa's eyes filled. "He's 9, Caroline. And she's 8. Beverly's mouth tightened. "A good mother teaches compassion." I set the glass down carefully. "A good grandmother doesn't teach one child that love means being displaced." Calvin shifted in his chair, but said nothing. Tessa wiped under one eye, then looked past me toward the hallway. Not at Maisie, not at Nolan, at the door. And under the table, Maisie slid her small hand into mine, while across the room my sister's eyes measured a space she had no right to open. That night, after the dishes were done and the children were in bed, I found Calvin on the back porch. He was sitting in one of my folding chairs, with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug he had not asked to borrow. The porch light made his hair look thinner than it was, and for a second, I saw the father I remembered from childhood. The man who could fix a leaky pipe with a wrench and 3 quiet words. The man who once carried me through a parking lot during a thunderstorm because I was afraid of lightning. Then he looked toward the kitchen window, where Beverly's shadow mounted behind the curtain, and that man disappeared. "You know this is wrong," I said. Calvin stared into the yard. "Your mother is worried about Tessa. She can be worried without taking Maisie's room." He rubbed one hand over his face. "Nolan's had a hard year. So has my daughter." I know. That was the part that hurt. He knew. If he had argued with me, if he had pretended Beverly was right, maybe I could have hated him cleanly. But Calvin understood exactly what was happening. He just wanted someone else to stop it. When I was little, he used to tell me that a house stayed standing because every beam did its job. Not the loudest beam, Not the prettiest one. Every beam. I thought about that while he sat on my porch, in my chair, looking at my lawn, unable to hold up even one honest sentence in my defense. Then say something, I told him. He winced like I had asked for too much. You know how your mother gets. Yes, I said. I do. She's scared when things fall apart. After Tessa's divorce, she just wants to keep everyone close. She doesn't keep people close, Dad. She pins them down. For the first time, he looked at me. There was sadness in his face, but no courage behind it. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be, he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because those were the words people use when they want the quiet person to stay quiet a little longer. Above us, the upstairs window of Maisie's room glowed faintly. I thought of her small hand sliding into mine under the table. I thought of Nolan looking down at his bricks, like he wished his name had never been brought into it. This is already bigger than me, I said. Calvin looked away. And that was when I stopped waiting for my father to become the kind of man who would stand between his wife and the daughter she was hurting. The next morning, I went to work with the kind of calm that feels more like a bandage than a feeling. I made oatmeal for Maisie. I braided her hair. I packed her lunch with the little note she liked folded under the napkin. Have a moon-bright day. I wrote it the way I always did, with a tiny crescent in the corner. Beverly watched from the kitchen table. Sipping coffee like the night before had been a misunderstanding I was expected to outgrow. Maisie did not say much. She kept touching the sleeve of my cardigan while I moved around the kitchen, as if checking that I was still there. When the school bus came, she climbed the steps slowly and turned back once before the doors closed. I should have followed my instincts then. By 10:15, I was in a therapy room with a second grader working on sentence endings when my phone lit up with the school's number. I let it ring once, then picked up because schools do not call during instructional time unless something has gone wrong. It was Lenora Pike, Maisie's principal. Caroline, she said gently, can you come to the library? The library was only 2 hallways over, but it felt farther. I found Maisie in the reading corner, curled into a blue beanbag with her backpack still on. Mrs. Bell, her teacher, stood nearby with that careful teacher face adults use when they are trying not to frighten a child more than she already is. Maisie looked so small. Not young. Small. Lenora stepped beside me and lowered her voice. She wouldn't go into class after morning meeting. Mrs. Bell asked if something happened at home, and Maisie said she didn't know if she still had a room to come back to. The words landed quietly. That made them worse. I knelt in front of my daughter. Maisie. She would not look at me at first. Her fingers worried the zipper pull on her backpack, back and forth, back and forth. Grandma said Nolan needs a home more than I do, she whispered. Is that true? Everything inside me went still. No, I said. That is not true. Her mouth trembled. I can be smaller, Mommy. I can use less room. There are moments when a parent hears the exact shape of the damage. I took her hands in mine. Listen to me. You do not have to become smaller so adults can feel bigger. She blinked, and one tear slipped down without sound. I did not go home and fight. Not then. I stood up, thanked Lenora, and asked her to send me a short email documenting what Maisie had said. Because that morning, I finally understood. This was no longer about a bedroom. This was about who my daughter believed she was allowed to be. Lenora's email came through at 3:42 that afternoon. It was only 6 sentences long, plain and careful, the way school documentation always is. Maisie appeared withdrawn. Maisie stated she was unsure whether she still had a bedroom at home. Maisie asked whether another child needed her home more than she did. No opinions, no accusations. Just facts lined up in black letters, impossible to argue with if you had any honesty left in you. I sat in my car in the staff lot and read it twice. Then I drove home. The house looked ordinary when I walked in, which somehow made it worse. Beverly had a candle burning on the counter, something vanilla and too sweet. Calvin was watching a game in the den, with the volume low. Tessa was upstairs with Nolan, laughing at something on her phone. Maisie stayed close to me, her backpack still on one shoulder, while my mother called from the kitchen, We saved you dinner. Like we were normal. Like my daughter had not spent the morning wondering if she could shrink herself into being easier to love. I took Maisie upstairs, helped her change, and let her sit on my bed with a book while I went back down to make tea. That was when I heard the printer in the corner of the breakfast nook click once. A page slid out slowly. I almost ignored it. Then I saw my name. At the top in bold letters it said, Family Protection Agreement. I picked it up before anyone came back into the room. The wording was dressed up to sound harmless. Cooperative household, shared family stability, long-term residential interest. But I had spent years reading school reports written by people trying to hide hard truths under soft language. I knew camouflage when I saw it. Halfway down the page, there it was. Tessa Whitaker and Nolan Whitaker shall be recognized as long-term residents of the property on Willowbend Drive, with continued access and household consideration in the event of emergency, illness, or family transition. Household consideration. That phrase sat in my hand like a cold stone. Beside the printer, stuck to the edge of the paper tray, was a yellow note in Beverly's handwriting. Have C sign before Saturday. Tell her it protects Nolan if something happens. For a moment, I did not move. The kettle started to hiss behind me, soft at first, then louder. Upstairs, Maisie laughed once at something in her book, and the sound steadied me more than breathing did. I folded the paper once, then unfolded it. I photographed every line with my phone. Then I photographed the note. That was the moment I understood the room was only the doorway. They were not trying to make space for Nolan. They were trying to make a claim. I did not confront Beverly that night. That was the first thing that surprised me about myself. For most of my life, I had believed silence meant losing. If I did not answer quickly enough, my mother filled the space with her version of the truth. If I waited too long, Tessa cried first. If I stayed calm, Calvin called it maturity, and used it as permission to do nothing. But standing there, with that agreement in my hand, I understood something different. Silence could also be preparation. I slid the paper back into the printer tray exactly where I found it, left the yellow note stuck to the plastic edge, and carried my tea upstairs like any other tired mother at the end of a school day. Maisie had fallen asleep sideways on my bed with one sock half off and her book open against her chest. I stood there looking at her for a long moment before I moved. Then I went to my closet. Behind a stack of winter sweaters was a small fireproof box I had bought the week after closing. Not because I expected trouble, but because owning a house made me feel like the kind of woman who should know where her papers were. I unlocked it on the floor, the way I had done only twice before. Inside was the life I had built in documents. The deed, the mortgage, the title policy, the tax bill from Dauphin County, the homeowner's insurance. The closing disclosure with my down payment printed in a number so exact, it still made my stomach tighten. $41,500. My custody agreement with Clay. Every page had the same quiet fact running through it. Caroline Whitaker. Not Beverly. Not Calvin. Not Tessa. Not a family committee. Me. I laid the papers across the carpet one by one. I did not feel powerful. Not yet. I felt awake. At 9:17, I texted Hector Alvarez, the school counselor, who had once told me that people who create chaos depend on everyone else being too embarrassed to write things down. I sent one sentence. I think I need a lawyer. He called 2 minutes later. I told him enough. Not everything. Just the room, the agreement, Maisie in the library, the way my mother kept using Nolan's pain like a key. Hector listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Don't argue with people who need you to look unstable. Document first." "I have photos," I said. "Good. Take more. And call Adrian Cho." He gave me the number. After we hung up, I sat on the closet floor with the deed in my lap and Lenora's email open on my phone. For the first time since I had walked into Maisie's half-erased room, I did not rehearse what I would say. I gathered what I could prove. Adrian Cho's office was above a dentist on Market Street, with a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and winter coats. I went there on my lunch break the next day. with my folder pressed against my chest, like something living. She was not what I expected. No sharp suit, no dramatic desk, no wall full of threatening diplomas. She wore a gray sweater, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman who had heard every version of "but their family," and no longer found it persuasive. I gave her the facts in order, because facts were the only thing keeping me steady. The house was in my name. The mortgage was in my name. Beverly, Calvin, Tessa, and Nolan had moved in without a lease and had never paid rent. They had tried to take Maisie's room. They had printed an agreement giving Tessa and Nolan long-term interest in my home. My daughter had already been affected badly enough that the school documented it. Adrian listened, asked 3 questions, then opened the deed. "This part is simple," she said. "They are confusing access with ownership. You allowed them in. That does not mean they get to build a throne." I looked down at my hands. They were folded so tightly my knuckles had gone pale. "So, I'm not overreacting." "No," she said. "You are under-responding, but we can fix that." She drafted the notices that afternoon. 1 for Beverly, 1 for Calvin, 1 for Tessa. Because Nolan was a child, everything involving him had to run through his mother, and Adrian was careful with that. She also prepared a letter stating that no agreement regarding residence, property interest, or household authority was valid without my informed written consent, reviewed separately from anyone pressuring me. "Do not sign anything at home," she said. "Not even a birthday card if your mother hands you a pen too quickly." I almost smiled. By Friday morning, the notices had been served. Quietly, properly, legally. Copies went by certified mail too. Adrian called it boring on purpose. I called it oxygen. At home, I became almost pleasant. I asked Tessa what flavor cake Nolan wanted. I told Beverly the napkins looked nice. I listened while she described Saturday's party like she was unveiling a new chapter of family healing. She thought my calm meant surrender. She had always made that mistake. Friday night, after everyone went to bed, I stood in Maisie's doorway. Nolan's new comforter was still folded on the chair. The moon lamp was safe in my room beside my daughter's pillow. Maisie looked up at me from under the blanket. "Are we leaving?" "No," I said. "We are finished leaving places that belong to us." Then I closed the door halfway and went downstairs to put the deed back in the folder for Saturday. Saturday came in bright and cold. The kind of winter sunlight that makes every window look cleaner than it is. By 10:30, my house was full of people who thought they had been invited to a child's birthday party. Aunt Marjorie brought a sheet cake from the grocery store with blue frosting and Nolan's name written in crooked white letters. 2 mothers from his baseball team stood near the counter holding paper cups of punch. Mavis Coleman from across the street came with a wrapped book under her arm because she never arrived anywhere empty-handed. Clay showed up late, as usual, but he came, and that mattered more than I wanted to admit. Beverly moved through the kitchen like a hostess in a house she owned. She touched shoulders, refilled cups, laughed too loudly, and every few minutes she glanced at me to make sure I was still behaving. Tessa had dressed Nolan in a new button-down shirt. He looked uncomfortable in it. Maisie stayed close to my hip, her hand tucked into the back pocket of my sweater, as if she needed proof I would not disappear. After the candles, after the song, after Nolan blew out the little number 9 while everyone clapped, Beverly tapped her spoon against a glass. "I just want to say something," she announced. Of course she did. She stood beside Tessa and put one hand on Nolan's shoulder. "This year has been hard for our boy, but this family knows how to make room. Today, we're giving Nolan something he needs more than anything, a room of his own." The kitchen softened with polite smiles. Tessa covered her mouth like she was overcome. Nolan looked at the floor. Maisie's fingers tightened in my sweater. Beverly turned toward me. "Sometimes little girls have to learn compassion. Maisie is lucky. She has a stable mother." That was when I set my folder on the table. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. "Before anyone gives away my daughter's room," I said, "I need everyone to understand something." Beverly's smile froze. "Caroline, not now." "Yes," I said, "now." I opened the folder and took out the deed. There is no family vote. There is a deed. This house has one legal owner. Me. Beverly laughed once, thin and sharp. Paperwork doesn't change family. No, I said. But it does change who gets to make decisions in this house. I laid down the notices next. Beverly's, Calvin's, Tessa's, then the printed agreement, then the photograph of her note telling herself to get me to sign before Saturday. The room went silent in a way no birthday party should ever be silent. Mavis Coleman picked up her purse slowly. I watched that woman carry groceries in after work with that little girl asleep on her shoulder, she said. You don't get to call a house family property just because you got comfortable inside it. Clay looked at Beverly, then at Tessa. Do not use my daughter's name in another family plan unless Caroline is included. Beverly's face lost color. Tessa started crying for real this time. And I stood there with my daughter beside me, my folder open, and my voice calm. I didn't come to argue, I said. I came to correct the record. The party ended without anyone saying it was over. People left in the careful way people leave when they have seen too much truth at once. The baseball mothers gathered their coats and murmured goodbyes to Nolan. Aunt Marjorie took her cake carrier and avoided Beverly's eyes. Mavis touched Maisie's shoulder on her way out and said, That room was always yours, sweetheart. Clay stayed long enough to help carry the folding chairs back to the garage, then paused by the door. You did the right thing, he said. I nodded, because I could not spend energy making him feel better for only recognizing it after strangers did. The 30 days after that were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, exactly. Quiet like a house holding its breath. Tessa moved first, taking Nolan to a small apartment near his school. Before they left, I knelt in front of him and said, This was never your fault. He looked at me like he did not know whether he was allowed to believe that. I hoped one day he would. Beverly did not apologize. She packed dishes that were not hers and complained about betrayal in a voice loud enough for every wall to hear. Calvin folded his shirts into boxes and moved around me like a man walking through a room full of broken glass. On the last morning, he stood on the porch with his coat over his arm. I should have said something sooner, he said. Yes, I answered. You should have. It was not forgiveness. It was just the truth, and sometimes truth is the only clean thing left to hand someone. After they were gone, I changed the locks. Not out of revenge, out of arithmetic. Old keys belonged to old rules. That weekend, Maisie and I carried paint cans upstairs. We covered the scuffed walls in fresh blue and put the planets back slowly. She chose where every star went. Near the door, in careful white letters, she asked me to paint 4 words. My room, my sky, my home. When the moon lamp turned on that night, the whole ceiling softened. Beverly called 3 weeks later. She said she was ready to forgive me. I let the silence answer first. Then I said she could see Maisie with me present, in my house, by my rules. She hated the terms. But terms are how love stops becoming a weapon. I did not scream that Saturday. I did not beg. I opened a folder and let the deed speak for me. My family had tried to vote my daughter out of her own room. They forgot the house already had a voice. Mine. The lesson I carry from that house is simple, but it took me years to learn it. Love should never require you to disappear. For a long time, I thought being the calm one meant absorbing everything. I thought a good daughter stayed patient. A good sister understood. A good mother kept the peace so her child would not have to hear the fighting. But peace that costs your child her safety is not peace. It is surrender dressed up as kindness. Family can be a beautiful word. It can mean dinner on the table, someone waiting with a porch light on, a hand reaching for yours before you ask. But in the wrong mouth, family becomes a tool. It becomes the word people use when they want access without respect, sacrifice without gratitude, and obedience without accountability. A boundary is not a wall built out of hate. Sometimes it is a door with a lock, protecting the people inside. Sometimes it is a quiet sentence. Sometimes it is a legal paper on a dining table. Sometimes it is a mother telling her daughter, You do not have to become smaller so other people can feel bigger. What Caroline learned was not how to win an argument. She learned how to stop confusing silence with strength. True strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is steady hands, documented truth, and the courage to let people be angry when you finally choose yourself. Children remember the rooms where they felt safe. Adults remember the day they stopped apologizing for protecting them. So, tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone use the word family to pressure you into giving up something that mattered? What would you have done in Caroline's place? If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness is not permission, and love without boundaries is not love at all.